At the end of Season 3 of The Dragon Prince, Soren finally turns away from his father and joins Callum and Callum's team. This is the expected redemption narrative we had all been waiting for. Because Soren is the undervalued, underappreciated, abused son of a megalomaniacal father, and because a lot of people who watch this show are fans of Avatar: The Last Airbender, there were inevitably many comparisons made between his story and the story of Zuko from Avatar. Predictably, there was a backlash to this comparison, with other people saying that the two narratives were not remotely comparable, with some, including people I highly respect, going so far as to call Soren's redemption nothing but cheap sentimentality. Nothing but a shallow conceit aimed at those who like redemption narratives. Now, speaking as a relative moderate in this debate, I would like to wade into it cautiously and thoughtfully. Does Soren's redemption narrative mostly work? Yes. Is it as good as Zuko's narrative throughout Avatar? No, and I don't think it's even close. These are fairly straightforward points, and I really do not think they are that controversial. What's more important and interesting to me is how the difference between Zuko's narrative and Soren's narrative corresponds to a much broader discrepancy. That which exists between characters who reside firmly within the boundaries of tropes and characters who transcend those tropes. Now, there's nothing wrong with tropes, and I have never been a fan of all those people raised on cinema sins who point out a trope and they're like, oh, it's using so-and-so trope! That's so bad, and I feel so smart for recognizing that! No, that's asinine criticism, and I rebuke that wholeheartedly. Tropes are important. They are building blocks of storytelling, but that's all they are. A house needs a foundation, but you would not call just the foundation a house. A character turning from the dark to the light is a trope, a very old trope. It's something commonly used in fantasy or mythical or other grandiose works where there is such a thing as a firm dark side and a firm light side. There is nothing wrong with this dynamic, just like there is nothing wrong with having two characters from opposite social classes fall in love. In each case, there is innate drama built into the trope, but if a work only relies on that built-in innate drama, instead of actually expanding on it and making it unique and making it special, the work can feel relatively stale and trite. The character dynamics feel like they've been created using a mold, instead of arising organically. Ernest Hemingway said that you should write people, not characters, as characters are caricatures. While we can disagree with the specific terminology he uses, the basic point he makes is, I believe, quite valid. We should not create characters who are just exhibiting stale, simplified models of human behavior. We should instead create characters that reflect the vast and tempestuous spectrum of human behavior. People are messy and irrational and inconsistent, and that's our right. Now, what exactly does this mean for Zuko's narrative and Soren's narrative? Quite a lot, actually. Sorens Story follows the typical beats of a redemption narrative. He starts off secure in his beliefs about the world and about the innate goodness of his family. Because of the mistreatment he receives from his family, especially from his father, he feels distant from the beliefs he once held. And because of this distance, he starts questioning these beliefs. He starts noticing things that undermine the validity of these beliefs. Gradually, he comes to a point where he is ready to reject his father and join the heroes. This is a typical, solid, straightforward narrative. Nothing wrong with it. It's well constructed, yet it does not expand beyond the trope it fits neatly into. To use Hemingway's terminology, he seems more like a character than a real person. As the great American poet Wallace Stevens would have it, we must look beyond the image of the thing to the thing itself, as Avatar does with Zuko. When I watch Zuko's story throughout the 3 seasons of Avatar The Last Airbender, I never slip into complacency. I never go, oh, this is just another redemption narrative. Rather, I see it as the story of a young man who is questioning the militaristic beliefs and traditions in which he was raised, and stumbling haphazardly and confusedly to a place where he can question those beliefs and try and figure out what he wants for himself, what kind of beliefs he wants to hold, who in fact he is, and who in fact he wants to be. There's nothing stale or quotidian about it. It's just like in a well-done story wherein you have one character falls in love with 2 different characters. You don't just go, oh, this is just another love triangle story. Instead, you focus on the relationships at stake. So, we must ask ourselves, what exactly does well done mean in the context of these redemption stories? Again, I'm not saying Sorens Story isn't good or that it isn't successful. I think it is good and it is successful. They set out to do something with this character and they fulfilled that objective. And yet, in comparison to Zukos Story, it is less memorable. Why is this? How do you transcend the limitations of archetype? Much of it is, I believe, about specificity. A poor example of a trope comes from a simple desire to work that trope into your story instead of having it as something that arises organically from the wants and passions and choices of the people in the story. Think about, say, Kylo Ren's so-called redemption at the end of the last of our 9 films, Skywalker Saga. It comes out of nowhere. It does not feel connected to this character or his struggles. It's cheap sentimentality. Now, a good depiction of the trope is a depiction that angles into it organically, that makes it feel rich and ingrained within the text, and this is what we see with Soren. But a transcendent example of such a trope makes it feel like the trope isn't even there, like it's not borrowing from some hackneyed storytelling manual. It's just real, it's honest, there's no distance between yourself and the art. Not only does the general progression arise organically, but every step and misstep is treated with empathy and pathos. The character is clearly following their own tempestuous, contradictory path, not a preordained, stereotypical path. Soren's story is quite straightforward. You can trace a clear line easily from the moment he decides that maybe his father's authority is questionable, maybe he shouldn't trust his father, maybe he should start questioning his father. You can draw a direct line from that point to the point in which he joins Callum and Callum's team. Now, admittedly, a big part of the difference between Soren and Zuko is that Zuko is more crucial to the narrative of Avatar than pretty much any character up to and arguably even including Aang. And thus, Zuko's story is given 3 full seasons to play out, whereas Soren's transformation is mostly stuffed into 2/3 of Season 3 of The Dragon Prince. Given this, one could say that of course Zuko's transformation is going to be better. Of course it's going to feel more honest and more complete and less perfunctory. Now, I agree with this, but it's not the whole story. Simply spending a lot of time on a character's journey toward the light isn't enough to make that journey feel real and concrete. It isn't enough to make it arise from the swamps of abstraction and become something tangible and palpable. Rather, the secret is in what you do with that time. Zuko, to an extent, already knows that what he's doing is somewhat morally compromised at the start of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Much of Season 1 is less about Zuko changing as a person and more about us, the audience, learning why Zuko is like he is, what motivates him, what drives him to seek acceptance from his abusive father and capture the Avatar and try and restore himself to his place on the throne. What past experiences are driving him, psychologically speaking. Season 2 is about Zuko challenging and overcoming his own biases and prejudices and false beliefs, and this is demonstrated subtly through the actions he takes, through the decisions he makes. And even then, his progress isn't a straight line. He makes the wrong decision at the end of Season 2, and he spends the first half of Season 3 paying for it psychologically until he finally accepts that he cannot be the prince his father wants. He cannot fill that role. He refuses, and so he leaves the Fire Nation and joins Team Avatar. Even when Zuko is willing to accept that he is in the wrong, it takes him a while to change. That feels very honest to me. Now, none of this is to say that Sorens Story is bad or that it's lacking. This analysis is ultimately about why Sorens Story works, not about why I don't think it's quite as good as Zuko's. Unlike Zukos Story, Sorens Story doesn't need to carry all the weight of being this grand redemption narrative. The show doesn't expect it to carry that kind of weight. There are still 4 seasons left in the show after his redemption. Much of the focus on the show is, smartly I think, on how Soren's ability to better himself and join Callum contrasts against his sister Claudia's inability to turn toward the light. Soren's relatively straightforward redemption actually really works for this show because it is an effective contrast against Claudia's slip into more darker and nihilistic impulses. Redemption, thus, is not innately difficult. Despite Soren's bullying tendencies early on, he's able to overcome his prejudices and achieve the redemption he sought. Claudia's failures become more striking in juxtaposition with Soren's successes, and I think that's a really smart way to illustrate Claudia's moral decay. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like and comment and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. Keep watching The Dragon Prince. Hopefully we will get a 4th season relatively soon. Fingers crossed. Hoping for the best. Until then, we can just keep watching these first 3 seasons. They're all very great and very interesting. I can't wait to see what the show does next. Anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. That I can promise you. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.